Oh my gosh, I almost got hit right there. It's really just not going. Almost hit that van. Go, 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 go. Okay. Tesla sells what they call their full self-driving package for $8,000, and one of the main features of that package is Navigate on Autopilot, which Tesla says includes automatic driving from highway on-ramp to off-ramp, including interchanges and overtaking slower cars. So essentially, once I get on the freeway, no matter where I'm routing to, it will be able to drive me all the way until I'm getting on the off-ramp. So I decided to put Autopilot to the ultimate test and see how it would perform in some of the craziest intersections all across Los Angeles in rush hour. So I started out over at the 210 and routed myself to USC, which took me from the 210 to the 605 to the 10 to the 101 to the 110. So for the purposes of this test, I let the software determine everything. So if I'm hanging out in a passing lane or doing some stupid merge or something, it's the software, not me. Okay, let's get into it. The camera that's really going to help us see everything is on the roof, and it's a 360 camera. But that camera enables us to look around and see what's going on really at all of the cars around us, not just take this driver's view. So this is my first merge onto the 210, and right here on the screen it actually has a little trouble. It thinks I need to do a lane change, but this is actually a merge. So it has a little trouble right there reading that, but then it does figure it out. But it does beep at me 3 separate times to make sure that my hand is on the wheel, so it definitely needed me attentive there. And normally this lane is terrible, so I would get out of it immediately, but Autopilot just stayed in there, and for the purposes of this test, I just let it stay in there. So here we are merging onto the 101. It's taken this a little fast for me, and then it does a lane change here. And right here, it definitely is riding over the line. It's one of my biggest pet peeves with Autopilot. When it's taking a sharp turn, it kind of rides the outside of the lane, even if there's another car there. If we look at that from the front view, you can tell it was definitely on that line. And if we zoom in, it knows it was on that line, which is very interesting to me. It's also funny, I've gotten a bunch of comments about people saying the road markings are really terrible in LA. Yeah, you're right. Getting a little sketchy here. This turning. I'm glad that it's actually slowing down for me. It's absolutely necessary. Still trying to really go fast. And that's kind of annoying. I mean, my speed's still set to 70, which is why it still feels kind of like an advanced cruise control as opposed to self-driving, because it really should have slowed down a lot more there, but because my speed is still set at 70, it's really trying to get me to that speed. So right here is an example of it braking a lot harder than it needed to, because it was still trying to go 25 even though the flow of traffic is 5 or 10. And that caused this truck, who is already going to be speeding around me, to almost clip the back of my car because my car braked much faster than he anticipated. So I think Autopilot should have been braking sooner, and then also not left as wide of a gap as it is leaving, because that ended up with that truck not anticipating how much space I had. But I'm curious what you think Autopilot should have done instead, or do you think it did a great job? Leave a comment below and let me know what you think. For the most part though, stop and go traffic is actually pretty good in this, and it's pretty stress relieving that it's doing all the braking for you. And even if you do decide to drive it, or you need to because Autopilot isn't really doing a good job, you have one pedal driving, which I really like. Another stop that's just not necessary. Got some good distance there. It's really just not going. There we go. And right here is another pretty intense stop. I mean, it only goes from about 9 to 1, but you can see there's still a sizable gap there that it could have taken advantage of, and the car behind me was getting close to rear-ending me. A lot of hard braking that I'm not entirely comfortable with. I'm actually going to pull up my rear camera so I can watch this guy and be ready on my accelerator. I don't want to get rear-ended. Here's an example of a merge that Autopilot handles really well. It just slows down, lets this Toyota CHR in, no problem. No real complaints here, and the car behind me was driving fine at this point, so it did a really solid job there. My last Autopilot video was about bad LA drivers, and here's an example where he gave no intention that he was going to change lanes, but Autopilot handled it just fine. Alright, so aside from a lot of pretty intense braking that made me feel like the guy behind me might rear-end me, and that truck all the way back there that almost rear-ended me, other than that, it's been doing a solid job, and it took all the right lanes and everything. So here's one of the worst interchanges in my experience in LA, and that's the 101 getting out of the 110, because right here you have to change over to the left, and almost no one will ever let you in. So the car was trying for a little bit here, and then I'll show you the audio from when it was happening. Car's trying to get around me. Okay, well, I exited auto steer because I wasn't trusting that. Okay, back in auto steer. It's gonna try again. Come on, baby. No one's gonna let me in. It missed it. Nope, you missed it, Tesla. You missed it. So I said that I wasn't trusting it, and that's why I exited auto steer, but that's not actually the case. It was totally accidental. I was just trying to apply turning force and prove that I was there, and I did a little too much, and it exited auto steer, which kind of ruined this whole test. It didn't end up being able to make that lane change, and I was still surprised there wasn't even more traffic, because usually that is completely gridlocked. But it wasn't a perfect test, so let's go back around and do it again. Yeah, that's one of the most aggressive lane changes that I'm used to having to do in LA, and it's one of those ones where people just aren't going, you know, it's like 0 miles an hour up to 3 miles per hour, and then people will just turn on their blinker and start steering into the lane and be like, I'm sorry, dude, move out of the way. So no surprise that the Tesla couldn't handle that. Real quick, if you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit that thumbs up so that I know you're enjoying it and I can make more videos just like this. Also, real quick, this interchange is pretty crazy. As you can see, that car comes in there in front of me, and normally there's a lot more cars coming in, both at like full speed. So I would be curious to see how that would happen in the future if there were a lot more cars. All right, here we go. Take two, trying to get onto the 110. It's gonna try to make a left turn right here. Lane change. Oh, it looks like we're gonna have a gap. It did it. It got very lucky that it did it, because up ahead right here, if it hadn't had that gap up until here, there would have been no chance it would have been able to do that. Once it gets a lot more gridlocked, you see a lot more cars having to do maneuvers like this one's about to do, where it just kind of decides, even though the lane's closed now, I'll just get in front of this guy. Who really cares? No one really follows the rules anyway. So if the car didn't get that gap, this next clip is what I would have expected it to do. Right here, I'm getting onto the 10 West, and you're going to see immediately I need to make like 3 lane changes, and it's completely backed up, gridlocked, going like 0 to 2 miles per hour. Let's fast forward through this. Just to give you an idea, this is at 800%, so this is real slow just even getting to this merge. So this is a merge right now. I think it's realizing that, but it actually is mapping this all as 2 lanes. But it is a merge. You gonna hit that van? What's going on here? Okay, now it figured it out. Almost hit that van. Go, 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 go. Okay. I clicked on the accelerator. Nope, it did not know what to do there at all. Okay, back in autopilot. And now once it's merged, it's trying to make another lane change, and as you can see, it just really just kind of hangs out, doesn't do a great job. I actually ended up pressing the accelerator again. It seems like it just wants to stop until someone lets it in. Kind of just, no. It just slams on the brakes, it just gives up. So jumping a little ahead, we still haven't made that lane change. I went back into autopilot, and it's once again trying. It's just really slowing down. It's just waiting for someone to give me an opening. As you can see, that big gap between me and the car in front of me. This car is essentially going my same speed, so it just is preventing basically anything from happening right now. And then eventually, here we go. It's going to be able to make this lane change now that this nice wide gap opens. Success. But that's not the end of this interchange. You don't actually have to get over another lane, but this lane does split. And so you can see it splitting a little bit right here. Not enough room yet to get around this car, but probably around here or so it could recognize that it's splitting, but it still sees it as 2 lanes. And then finally it sees it and proceeds. So overall, that initial change and merge onto the 10 was pretty terrible. So I went and decided to do it again. And here's the second round. Let's see if it does any better this time. Traffic is a little lighter, so things are actually moving along. There's actually some sizable gaps that we can see here, but it does slow down pretty quickly. Let's see if it can do any better. Fast forwarding again, you can see that this BMW graciously leaves a gap, and the Tesla is able to complete that totally fine. I think it would help off the bat if they mapped it correctly, because it seemed like it was mapping that as 2 different lanes, but then it did figure it out. That was way better than the first time, so that's great to see. Keep in mind the nature of one of these videos is that I'm editing It's around 3 hours of footage or so that I'm editing from. So I'm picking out the good cases and the bad cases. And the rest of the time, Autopilot is just doing what it should do, doing a solid job. It's not very fun to watch because it's just driving. It's trying to get me over here because my exit is coming up quick. Oh, changed its mind there. Then it went for it. My guess is that it saw this BMW, it was about to change, and then it was like, wait, they're coming up quick, and then it realized they're not coming up that quick and went for the lane change. Real quick, if you're enjoying this video, make sure you're subscribed to this channel for lots more videos like this and about the Model Y and Tesla in general. Okay, here's another one. I'm getting right onto the 110 North right now, and so it does have to get over one lane right here. There's actually a Tesla behind me, so maybe they'll be a little more forgiving. Again, the quick speed up, even though the flow of traffic is not much, it's like 20. So here we go. We should be getting behind this Mazda. Good job. Here's a great example of Autopilot doing something that on paper is totally correct, but in practice didn't really work out very well. This car in front of me quickly changes lanes and doesn't have quite enough room, so it's still hanging out just a tiny bit in my lane. So Autopilot slams on the brakes as if they're totally still in my lane. And you can see it quickly speeds up there again, and that is me hitting the accelerator because I know there's enough room there and I don't want to get rear-ended. Today's kind of like the downtown LA special, and that's where some of the most extreme ones are. I'll have to go over to West LA sometime and do the 405 because a lot of those interchanges are pretty intense as well. Here we are merging onto the 5, and this is where Autopilot really shines, in my opinion, is just when someone actually lets you in. It seems like that's the equation for it to actually work. I mean, normal driving, people need to let you in if you're ever going to make any lane changes, but especially for Autopilot, it needs a pretty sizable gap where someone is obviously going to let you in there. So here is another pretty intense freeway on-ramp with a lot of traffic, but first, Mercedes trying to get around me. Oh man, you really should just see the traffic, my friend. So at first I thought it was hilarious that he was trying to get around me, but at this point, maybe I don't blame him because of what's about to happen. Just gonna stop. Mercedes is gonna get around me. How's this lane change gonna work? Cars are trying to get around me. Oh, this car's letting me in, Tesla? Okay. It gave up. So as you can see right there, it gave up on me. It did the same thing where it just brakes. And it just said trying to maneuver, be prepared to assist. And it didn't tell me to assist, but at a certain point it was just like, you have a gap there, you should have gone for it. So I took over. It's gonna have to do another one here. I don't think it can do traffic lane changes at this point, like this kind of traffic. Heavy stop and go. So let's fast forward through a bunch, but my blinker has been on this entire time. Okay, it gave up there, which was the smart thing to do since this lane is going so much faster. And also I don't think it needs to get over, but here it's gonna try. Oh, it's gonna have a gap here. And there's that perfect equation where someone either lets me in or it has a really sizable gap, although it did get really close to that Civic. So these are hard circumstances that I'm putting it through, like learning how to drive in LA, especially in this kind of traffic, do all these freeway interchanges. It's tough. Here's another instance where Autopilot brakes a little hard for me, and then this car is swerving out totally illegally across all of these lines, which pretty much everyone's doing behind me. But again, I think Autopilot was braking too early there because there was still a lot of room there, and the car pretty much almost hit the back of my car. And while we're here, let's check out how many people are just going to illegally cross all these lines and just ruin it for everyone. We got one right there. I think there's a second one coming up right here. Nice. At this point, it's just waiting for someone to give me an opening with the blinker on, which should be enough, but in LA, if you're not actually already turning into that lane, people aren't really going to give you anything, as you can see right here. So I end up giving up and just driving off. And this is how I had to complete the lane change. I just basically started turning into this lane right when I had a little bit of a gap. He accelerated and I just kept going for it because he wasn't going to let me in. So at some point, self-driving cars are going to have to be able to do a maneuver like that if they want to complete the route, because people just will not let you in, and I can only imagine that it's worse in other places in the world. So they are hard circumstances, but I think it should have just told me to take over. It seems like it's like, no, I can do it. I can do it. Trust me. Wait, I can do it. And by that time, you have a 3-car pileup behind you. Now, of course, when people do let you in, it does really solid lane changes like this one. It was a pretty assertive lane change, got me right into the exit lane I needed to be in, and those are the times when it really shines. So I got off of the 5 over in East LA, and this is me getting back on the 10 over in East LA, and I let it do this whole roundabout right here to get onto the freeway, and it takes it awfully slow. As we can see, that car's just going to start getting further and further away from me, but it does a really great job steering. Nothing really to complain about with how it's doing it, just that it does it really slow, and we're about to merge onto the freeway. It's still only going 35, but it gets me up there in time, just makes the car behind me a little mad. So as I was driving along and about to get on the 101 North right here, I had a pretty interesting scenario. So that is phantom braking. So right as I'm getting to this overpass, it suddenly goes from 55 all the way down to 41, seemingly for no reason. And if we look at the wide view, obviously there was nothing it needed to brake for right here. So if we slow it down and zoom in a bunch, we can see that it actually thought there was a signal right here that was red. And then I already had proceeded through it, but it just still decided it needed to slow down. And then eventually I guess it realized there wasn't a signal there and just started speeding up again. And then slowing down the wide view, I guess it was maybe this sign. I don't entirely know what it was thinking was a red light. Leave a comment below if you think you know what it was. But definitely a big hiccup there, because if it was a light, it was way too late seeing it, and then it wasn't a light, so it stopped, and I could have been rear-ended if there was someone behind me. Every once in a while, for this drive, it was doing some weird stuff that I'm not used to. Like right here, the blinker turned on for a second, did 3 clicks, and then it just turned off. But overall, it was doing a great job, and right here you can see it pretty aggressively slows down to let this Civic in, and my initial thought was that I wish it would have just sped in front of them when I was driving, but looking back on the footage, it couldn't have done any better. It did a really great job there. So now fast forward, we're getting onto the 605 here. These right 2 lanes are going to go onto the 605, but it has me get in the rightmost lane, and actually on screen it said it was doing this based on speed, so it was trying to get around slower cars, but it was bringing me into the rightmost lane, which typically isn't the right thing to do. The leftmost lane should be the passing lane, but it's a different circumstance since right up ahead these 2 lanes are going to split off to the 605. Now right here, it does a bunch of different lane changes as soon as it's getting onto the 605. So we see that it's going to get over to the right here, which normally I wouldn't do because these cars entering are always trying to get over to the left pretty much immediately, but it did a great job there. And then if we fast forward just a second, or probably closer to 20 seconds, it decides to get into the fast lane, and so it goes in front of this truck. The truck was coming up a little bit quick, so I was kind of surprised that it went for it, but it does a pretty good job and keeps the distance from the car in front of me, goes the flow of that lane. High curvature detected. Navigate on autopilot limited. Interesting. Right here's another pretty quick lane change, and I feel like it kind of cut off this truck. The 360 camera looks further away, but that was very close to that truck. And also that SUV was speeding past, so it was pretty sketchy. You can see my face when it was actually happening. Also, you'll notice that if there's a car 2 lanes away, it totally goes for the lane change. It doesn't even consider the thought that maybe they're also changing into your lane. And so that always freaks me out a little bit. And then also, there's been some comments of people in previous videos saying that it was braking to stay out of someone's blind spot, but I've chilled in people's blind spots for like 2 minutes on autopilot and then just taken over and got out of their blind spot. So that is not the case. So over the course of the next mile or so, it was trying to get me into the fast track lane, which I don't have fast track, and I also had the HOV lanes turned off on the screen. So it was trying to get me in there and decided against it. And then you'll see a clip right here where it tries again and then decides against it. And then the third time I actually had to cancel it myself. Honestly, I wish there was another setting you could adjust for how much it speeds up when there's like a hole in traffic, because right now, you know, it's set to 55, but traffic's going about 20 to 25 depending on which lane you're in. And it seems like every time it gets a hole, it just tries to get back up to 55, which is just not necessary. And then it ends up braking really fast. But then, of course, there are times where I wish autopilot did more braking, because right here, this guy cuts right in front of me, and it only really slows down 1 mile per hour. That guy has a Washington license plate, so LA can't take credit for him, all right? So right here, about 20 seconds before this, autopilot actually had me get into this lane because it was faster, and now at this point, it realized it actually has to be in the other lane to follow the route. So again, it's stopped and waiting for a hole, and this guy gets mad right here that it hasn't gone for it yet. He finally slows down more, gives more of a hole, and finally autopilot takes it. So here's actually the opposite scenario where this car is going to need to come up right here and get in. So Autopilot needs to create a hole. Unfortunately, there's no arms built into Autopilot to flail at this guy to show how mad they are, but he was able to get in. Right now it's kind of weird. It thinks it's like changing lanes. There's just this big gap. Obviously you can see there's no lane. So up ahead, as soon as this merges, it is going to need to merge and then get over one lane instantly. But it was interesting that there was such a big gap there. But if we fast forward a little bit, you'll see an actual pretty solid merge right here where it keeps going instead of just stopping with its blinker on. And then it actually makes another really solid lane change right here that it needs to do very quickly. And it gets me off exactly where I need to be. Right here we have Autopilot wanting to make a lane change that really just shocked me because it didn't really seem necessary, and also the lane next to me that it's trying to get into is going so much slower than the lane that I'm in. But what it does is it just drops about 15-20 miles per hour and kind of makes this truck behind me pretty angry, and then it gets over. So right here I saw this semi trying to get into my lane. Its signal was on, but Autopilot waited a lot longer than I typically would. Overall it did a good job and not much to complain about, but I would have just started that move a lot sooner than it did. And then here's another one of those lane changes where it quickly decides to do it and then changes its mind and then decides to actually proceed. So I think what happened was it thought that car wasn't coming up too quick, maybe they accelerated, so it changed its mind for a second just to be cautious, and then it decided to go for it for real. It's actually a habit now. Like when the car slows down and stops, I just immediately check the rear view mirror because I'm ready at the accelerator to just accelerate if I need to, because there's still a pretty sizable gap to the car in front of me, and if you check, I'm on one car length. So that's the shortest distance you can do. So here is one of the worst lane changes I've had. It decides to try to change into this gap right here. But right as it's about to do so, this car accelerates and then it just keeps turning. So I took over right there. I didn't really want to see what would happen. Probably it would have just done the thing where it swerved out of the lane, but I did not want to take that chance. So this is an interesting combination of their new traffic light thing, because this is actually metered and 2 cars per green. So I'll have to confirm it based on that. Yep, so it's going to take me up to the red. Now I can confirm. It's good. And then the final eventful moment for Autopilot on this drive was it not realizing that this was merging and then slamming on the brakes pretty suddenly, but then it figures it out and gets me into that lane. So we saw some pretty big extremes from Autopilot today, putting it through some pretty extreme circumstances. Sometimes it just sat there and kind of waited. It should have told me to take over, but it didn't, and it would just sit there with the blinker on until a gap opened up. But sometimes it did a really great job and really handled these lane changes how they should be done. Overall, it's really exciting technology, and I'm definitely excited to see what the future holds, especially with these really complicated scenarios. And just to reiterate, all that annoying stuff that happened, I'm not letting that happen all the time when I drive. I normally would take over in those cases. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to this channel if you're not already for lots more updates about Tesla and tech in general. Make sure to like this video if you appreciated it. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at RyanShawTech, and follow my second channel called And More, where you can subscribe for more in-depth videos about certain subjects. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.